New year, new me, new abyss. So the latest Abyss for version 5.3 has just came out, and in this video I will be presenting you a guide alongside with some tips and tricks you can use to help you clear the current Spiral Abyss and potentially help you get the 36 stars. So before we start, a quick disclaimer as usual, everyone has different characters built with different accounts with varying level of investments, so don't feel discouraged if you can't get the clear or maybe the 36 stars. That means you have a goal to strive towards for the next month or so, at least before the Abyss resets, or maybe you can try to aim to get the clear and the next reset. Otherwise, let us jump to floor 11. So floor 11 has a blessing of adding 75% pyro damage bonus to your entire team, so it's clear that they want you to run a pyro DPS based team. So if we start with Chamber 1, the first half you're gonna have to deal with a bunch of Natlan warriors. They spawn in clockwise, starting from 12 o'clock to 3, 6, and 9, going in a clockwise rotation. Or in simpler words, they spawn in front, and then they'll spawn to your right, behind, and then all the way to the left. You're gonna have to kill 24 of them. They're not really that strong, so get rid of all of them, and then we move on to the second half. So second half, we do have the Natlan robot. Just do your rotation as what you would always do, so just kill it and then we move on to the next enemy. It does have the mechanic with Natlan units where the bar builds up as long as the nearby character is in the Night Soul Blessing state. What you can do is basically like put on Kachina's skill or put on like Mavuika or Citlali skill, but otherwise we'll just move on to the next enemy. Afterwards, there will be 2 Ruined Drake Earth Gods, the grounded version, spawn both on the left and the right side of the chamber. Just go for one of them, the other one will come to you because they're mostly melee unit. Make sure you try to get them both at the same time, and there's also the whole mechanic with its weak spot. Just hit it if you can, or otherwise just brute force it and we'll be good to go. Then we move on to Chamber 2. So for the first half, we do have 2 Hydro Helichal Rogues. Grouping them is going to be a bit tricky without any sort of grouping units like Kazuha or something, because they don't really move that much. They do have particularly high Hydro resistance, so if you are running a Hydro DPS, you ideally want to bring a Rest Shredder like Kazuha or Xilonen in your team, but otherwise just focus on one of them. If you can stagger them towards the other one, that would be ideal, but the rest is pretty straightforward. Afterwards, it will be followed by 2 Mimic Plants being the Crackling Axe Metachol variant. Now what you can do here is go to the edge, do edge baiting in order for you to group them much easier. Natlan units will definitely have an advantage in breaking the special Void Ward shield, but other non-Natlan options would include something like any Electro Charge teams or Taser, Visual teams preferably with C6 with any Electro Reaction based teams, Burning teams especially works pretty well, and of course National itself. Otherwise, most regular teams will take a bit of time, but as long as you have enough DPS, it should work just fine. For the second half, you'll start off with 2 of the Adult Bathyspal V-Shap, which has I think slightly higher resistance to Hydro. So you want to go to the one side, either the left or the right of one of them, and then you can stagger one of them towards the other. It also has this particular move where it charges up a breath attack or a ball projectile, and if it hits you, you will lose health and energy through shield, but you can actually use any sort of ability like Overloaded or certain abilities like Xiangling shield or anything that can provide a bit of poise break in order to cancel the move. Otherwise, it is very much straightforward. Just try to kill them as fast as possible. And then we do have the 2 Eroding Avatars of Lava on the second part. So these guys, you just same strategy as the Ruined Drake. You go to one, the other one will come to you. It does have the whole overheat mechanic for the insta-kill, although it's not that necessary because they will be dead by the time you even build the part. And then we move on to Chamber 3. So we start off the first half with 2 Cryo Abyss Mages that spawn in front. Preferably try to bring pyro units for this half, but other elements like electro is probably the second best, and then the rest like anemo or geo or blunt weapons like claymore are going to work decently well, but the fastest is definitely going to be between pyro and electro, so ideally try to bring a team around that. So just make sure you save all your abilities and kill them as fast as possible, and afterwards you'll have to deal with the Cryo Herald, which spawns at the center. So his attack does apply Cryo onto you, which does slow you down, but you can use characters like Bennett or Jean in order to cleanse it, kill it until you deplete its health to like the last 5 to 10% I believe, and then it'll do this special move where it'll jump up, it'll land down doing AoE Cryo damage, so try to dodge this unless you want to take damage for whatever reason. Once it does this, it will enter its Cryo Shield phase. Just break the shield with the right elements like Pyro or Electro, and once you're done, it'll be... And we'll move on to the second half. So the second half, we have probably one of the most annoying floor 11 chamber tree variant that I think we've dealt by far. We do have the Eidolon Legends again, but instead of having one range and one melee, both of them are range. So you do want to be a bit careful here because they can very easily delete you pretty fast, especially if you're running a unit like Bennett. So the strat here is a bit tricky. You ideally want to hug one because their melee attack is very much telegraph and it does a good amount of damage but not as crazy as all their range attacks. So you want to focus on, let's say, the first one on the left, right? And then you also want to pay attention to the other one on the right. Once the one on the right starts shooting its continuous laser beam move, you want to run directly to that Eidolon and reach within melee distance. The moment you do so, it will stop its laser attack in order to do its exploding melee attack. Rinse and repeat, and eventually both of them will slowly naturally group together, but the most important part of this is try to stay alive. If you do bring Pyro for this half, it's easy vaporize for your hand, so DPS wouldn't be that big of a problem, but try to just stay alive. So floor 12 for the first time, we are getting the floor blessings, but this time we have 2 blessings for different halves. For the first half, you will gain 75% pyro damage bonus for normal attacks, while for the second half, you will gain 75% more Night Soul aligned damage. So it's clear that the first half wants you to run a pyro normal attack unit like Arlecchino or Mavuika or maybe Hu Tao and Yoimiya to a certain extent, while the second half prefers you to run any sort of Night Soul aligned or Natlan DPS, which you know the options, so I'm not really going to say it. So for the first half of Chamber 1, you start off with 3 Yamkasos. Just go to either the left or the right one, the rest will do their Tether move and jump towards you, kill them all at the same time as fast as possible, and then the Yamkaso King or the Big Chungus will spawn. It does have the Pyro Fruit mechanic where the first instance it will summon 3 fruits. Ideally, you want to hit all 3 of them with Pyro so you can actually stun him for the next 5 seconds and make him lose quite a little bit of HP. If you don't have a Pyro unit in your team, there is 2 techs that I've discovered for you to be able to do. So you can do this with both Kazuha and Sucrose, where you take advantage of the fact that the ground that it summons applies this fiery path, and if you stand on that fiery path, you can apply Pyro to yourself. And from there, you can use abilities like Kazuha's Scale or Burst or Sucrose Burst in order to get it. So for that purpose, I'm going to show you a quick demonstration. So after it does this move initially, all you have to... it summons these... when it fires that shot, it summons this fiery path. So what you want to do is you want to wait for it to do the thing. The second move will be that, and then you can do this and immediately swirl Pyro and both Hydro at the same time. So with that said, it will be stunned for the next 5 to 6 seconds. You can do your rotations, and yeah, it's that's tip number 1 for Kazuha, and I'm gonna retry the same thing but this time with Sucrose. So it does just try to dodge this move so you don't get one-shotted. And what you can do is very much easily just stand here, use your burst right there, and directly stand under the burst to gain the Pyro infusion. And then you can just relax and it'll hit all 3 and bam. It's as easy as that, although you do want to be careful because my Sucrose is still on health, but I'm running free now. So yeah, that's the only tip I can give for this guy, so we'll move on to the next part. So after it does this Pyro mechanic attack, it has a chance of either jumping up to do the slam attack, or it will very likely do this belly puff in order to do the spin attack. So this one is going to require you to kind of stall a little bit, so I'm going to quickly show you guys the mechanic, or at least how to play around the belly puff or the spin attack. Now I'm going to have to try not to kill it too fast because my new roulette team is kind of good. So generally right after this, you want to observe whether he puffs his belly. So what he's going to do, right, you can't really play around this. He's going to run towards wherever you're at. And then if you just wait a little bit, it will do a second belly puff and go back to the center. So what you can do is you can basically like set up all your abilities and just keep this in mind. Try to not use your abilities when he does the first belly puff, because otherwise you're not going to be losing a bit of DPS, especially if you're playing something like a Circle Impact team. But if you're not playing a Circle Impact team, then at the very least, I hope this behavior or pattern behavior discovery will actually do that. And of course, it will do this pyro thing, which is it's kind of whatever, but I think you guys get the point. So otherwise, we'll move on to the second half. So the second half, we start off with 3 Ictimosaurus, aka the Flying Bats. Same as the first half, you either go to the left or the right side, do a bit of grouping, and just kill them all really fast. Then afterwards, we do have the new Night Watch Lady boss from Citlali. So it will always start with this cryo phase where it will spawn these 4 different cryo clones in 4 different directions. And the idea is that you want to break all 4 of the clones in order to stun her. Of course, Pyro is the best, Electro is the second best, while any other elements will take way too long to break. So I don't recommend it unless you have a lot of application. You can also use characters from the Masters of the Nightwind with their special elemental side by holding your charge attack button. Characters particularly like Ororon and Citlali will be able to freeze all the clones in place for about the next 10 seconds, and it does remove 25% or a quarter of the cryo shield. Now, grouping them is a bit tricky because they tend to send only 1 clone at a time, and what I discovered after going against this boss for a few times is that some of the clones will use specific moves, and it has a chance of actually being the clone that has the real enemy, so you could get a little bit of damage here and there, but otherwise it's really just an elemental check. Just make sure you get all that done. Be careful to not die, because if you do run Bennett, she's going to trigger Melt on you, which literally one-shot my Xiangling like quite a few times, so just try to be a bit careful on that end. But otherwise, it's a very straightforward enemy, and if you're done, we'll move on to Chamber 2. So the first half, we do have the 3 Xuanwen Beasts, which has high Hydro and a Nemo resistance. The same strat as the previous one, just run to one side and the other one will kind of move towards you. If you can play around the mechanic, which is to trigger freeze on them and then trigger shatter or any sort of other elements to break the freeze, you would be able to stun them for the next like 5 to 10 seconds and reduce their resistance. For Shatter, you can use either Geo or Blunt attacks from like Claymore or Plunging attacks, and of course the other elements that can trigger or react with Cryo will also work. Once you kill all 3 of these, and then their big boy will start coming around, better known as the Solitary Swanee. It also has a very similar mechanic where you want Freeze and Shatter, so ideally you do want to bring Cryo. Now his moveset is relatively fixed. It will start off by doing the massive wind into water swipe, and then he'll do 2 attacks, and afterwards he will charge up one of his 2 big moves. So the first water move, it will imbue itself with Hydro and just do lots of puddles which will do high Hydro damage. What you want to do at the very least is trigger Cryo in order to freeze it, and then of course break the freeze with whatever reactions that you can. It will stun it for the next 10 to 15 seconds, which will highly reduce a lot of its resistance, and this is going to be your biggest damage window. Afterwards, it will do 1 regular attack, and then it will start to charge up its second big Anemo move. It also gains high resistance, and it will spawn, I believe, 3 of these Anemo orbs. What you want to do is hit all of these Anemo orbs with any Pyro, Hydro, Electro or Cryo. Once you break all 3 of them, it will also stun the Swanee for the next 10 to 15 seconds, and the rest of the pattern is very much repetitive, so there's nothing of note. If you don't bring Cryo here, I've tested quite a few teams here and there, unless you run someone like, let's say, Nuvolet Hyper with Xilonen and Kazuha, or your DPS is so highly invested that you're able to clear it within 90 seconds, I highly recommend at least bringing 1 Cryo unit just for this chamber alone. But otherwise, we will move on to the second half. So the second half, we have 2 Mimics. We'll start off with the Ruin Guard Mimic, and then afterwards followed by the Natlan Robot Mimic. It has the special Void Ward Shield mechanic. You can break it with regular elemental attacks, although Night Soul aligned damage will fill the bar 3 times faster per hit. The first robot will spawn in front, and then the second Mimic will spawn directly at the center. The best Natlan characters to break this would be a combination of Mavuika, Xilonen, and Citlali. Or for the other DPS, I think Kinish in his Burning team will definitely enjoy breaking this shield, and the fastest by far has got to be Chasca with both a charge attack and her burst. Any other units outside of this, you can consider Ororon, but Ororon just contributes a little bit and not so much of the team. Kachina takes quite a while in order to actually trigger the skill, so unless you on-field, it's not really going to be that fast. Now, for the non-Natlan exclusive teams, you do have quite a few options. Of course, Electro Charge is particularly good. The team that I ran, I believe, I think it was Sucrose Taser with Xingqiu, Beidou, or Fischl. Of course, running Fischl in an Electro reaction-based teams will work. Ideally, you would like to have Constellation 6 Fischl because it will be noticeably slower without it. Cloran is another unit that surprisingly can solo break the shield, or at least break most part of the shield on her own. So that is one character I can recommend. Of course, for other teams, you do have burning teams, like Kinish Burning is obviously pretty good, but burning overall ticks very fast, so you can shred the shield really fast. The other options would be National or any Hyper Bloom variant, or a team that has very fast multi-hit units, notably like Yoimiya, Yelan, or Xingqiu, and ideally you at the very least want to run at least 2, but preferably 3 of these characters. But otherwise, the rest is pretty straightforward. Try to kill it before it shields up again, because if it does shield up again, you're going to be losing quite a lot of time. But if there's nothing of note, we will be moving on to Chamber 3. So the first half, we do have the Cryo Wayob. It will start off with this charge up move that sucks all your energy. You have to break the shield with enough damage before it successfully gains the Cryo Shield, because if you do that, you will gain all your energy back and it'll be stunned for the next 5 to 10 seconds. If you can't do this, there are a few other options. The first one is to weaken the shield as much as possible so that whenever it does create the Cryo Shield, it doesn't start at full health, thus making it easier for you to break it. Unlike a regular shield, the Cryo Wayob's shield is purely damage based, so if your team is able to do enough damage, you should be able to break the shield in time without having to worry about the Cryo Shield. So it is possible for you to not require bringing any sort of pyro characters, and I will demonstrate this right about now. So, if you see that, you don't actually need to bring a pyro on the first half, but if you bring a cryo character for Sawani, you should be fine. And now the other method I'm going to be demonstrating is with a Permafreeze team. Now there are 2 ways which I have made a massive discovery that you can do in order to prevent this super move. The first one that I mentioned previously in the other video is to run a freeze team. The idea is that you permanently freeze it, prevent it from going back to regular, so at least by that logic you won't have to bring a pyro character in this team and potentially kill it before it actually uses the move. Now the second one is to actually stagger it before it starts the move. So the second method is that it is possible for you to very much break its poise and stagger it, but I've tried quite a few things and I don't really know what you need to do in order to trigger the poise break. I've did it a few times before while helping some of my viewers over on my stream, and it is very much possible to stagger him out of the move, thus preventing him from doing the move in the first place, but this is kind of an inconsistent thing, so I recommend the other 2 methods, which is simply just bring a team with good DPS, set up your elemental burst early before he actually saps all your energy, or just run a freeze team and prevent it from doing the move in the first place. After you deal with this guy, you have the spinning Fontaine robot, aka Xiangling from home, or the spin to win boy. He is a Numa boy, so if you hit him 2 times for a short stun with any Uja attacks, you will be able to stun it and change its attack mode completely. Characters that can do Uja are as such. For elemental skill, we have Navia, Lynette, Cloran, Sijuin, and Chevreau. For the others, we do have Risley with his burst, Furina's normal attack in her DPS mode. Now, it's not necessary for you to play around the mechanic, it only stuns the robot and it doesn't reduce its resistance or anything, so it doesn't really matter as much. And lastly, we do have the second half, which is the Tenebrous Papilla Type 3. Type 3 is the variant where you have to deal with the Legatus Golem, Millennial Pearl Seahorse, and the Yamkaso King. I swear to god, this guy is probably gonna make Abyss his new home. So as usual, he will start with his super mega move, where it will spawn with a very tough void shield, similar mechanic to all the other mimic plants, just much stronger. So obviously for the good units, I've mentioned it just now, Kinish, Chasca, Mavuika with a combo of Xilonen and Citlali would break this pretty well. Definitely do not run Molani, I think Ororon should be able to work pretty well. For the Non-Natlan teams, here are some options you can consider. We have burning teams naturally, Electro Charge, preferably with Sucrose, Fischl, preferably also with Constellation 6, because if you don't have C6, you would be able to notice how it takes a little bit longer in order to break the shield. Preferably take advantage of her Ascension 4 passive by running her in any Electro Reaction teams. You also have the likes of Hyper Bloom, National to a certain extent. For the character-specific teams you can play around, we do have Cloran, who is pretty good at breaking the shield all by herself. Amber's Elemental Burst hits very fast, so it does build like a good portion. Hinari in any Quicken or Spread team would be able to also build a good portion due to how many projectiles he actually shoots out. And of course the fast multi-hit units like Yoimiya, Yelan or Xingqiu, but ideally you want to pair multiple of these together in a single team if you want to have the best chance at breaking the shield. You do have the option to just iframe with your Elemental Burst or just dodge it perfectly, or you could also run outside the arena, but I do not recommend this because it does gain 70% resistance if you do so. If you are able to break the Void Ward shield, it will continue fighting with only 35% resistance, so it is within your best of interest to break the shield with whatever teams you have. So I made a tier list for every single reaction to tell you which reactions are going to be best for each of the respective stuff. I think I typoed something here. So of course we have the reactions that work for both halves. We have the reactions that can work on the respective half, whether it be first half or second half. And this one is particular for Flow 12 only, so let's go over it. Now, obviously, Melt is going to be the best for both halves. I did try to do the 4-star Melt on the second half, and my investment is a little bit lower than I anticipated. But obviously, the current blessings is very much for Mavuika and Arlecchino, so any Melt or Pyro teams is going to strive regardless. Now, Vaporize is going to be a bit interesting because I think if we were to talk about Reverse Vape, I think Reverse Vape is probably better on the, I would say, the second half side, but I'm not entirely sure. The thing is, I think Vape can work for the first half. It just depends on how much investment you have. For the second half, I think it's hard to make it work because the Tenebrous shield is quite hard to shred if you don't run very specific gimmicks. So yeah, and of course I don't recommend Forward Vape because the first half does have a lot of hydro resistance, so unless you have like Xilonen Kazuha, I don't really recommend doing so. You can go use it for the second half, but as long as you have a good pyro unit that's able to break the new Cryo Boss Lady shield, I think you should be fine. And there's also the Mimesis, but I don't recommend doing that. Overloaded works quite both halves. I've tested both Arlecchino and Cloran Overloaded with Chevreau, without Bennett of course, and Xiangling and Fischl. And well, let's just say that obviously Arlecchino first half is going to absolutely destroy. Cloran also works for both halves, despite my Cloran being slightly underbuilt or having inferior artifacts to Arlecchino. But overall, I think it's able to do the shield breaking that it can do. And if you do pair it up with units like Fischl and Cloran, of course, it's going to be amazing at breaking the Tenebrous Mimesis shield alongside the Papilla shield. Superconduct, I haven't really tested it, but I actually ran Eula Hyper on the first half, and all I can say is he's very much suffering. Right now, we don't really have a proper Superconduct team, and the only reason to use Superconduct is for physical, so I don't really recommend it overall. Electro Charge, I think, does work pretty well for second half. Now, I'm not too sure about how well Electro Charge can work on first half, but I think the Swanee would have like, I think 50% hydro resistance, so unless you run Sucrose to reduce it by 40%, I think it might be doable in the first half. But I can't really say much about that. I think Electro Charge is definitely perfect for second half, especially for both the Tenebrous shields on top of, if you run like minimum double Electro with like Fischl Auroron or Fischl Beidou, you should be able to break the Night Watch, the Nightwind Ladies boss relatively fast. Not exactly slow, but a decent amount of time. Freeze is half-half. I would say it's usable. I did mention that you can use Freeze against the Cryo Wayob to prevent it to do the super move, but with my best team, like I ran Furina, Xilonen, Shenhe, Ayaka, most of them are like double crown or triple crown, and even the performance is a little bit underwhelming as I would like to really want it to be. So you can run Freeze team on the first half, but I don't recommend running Freeze overall. Burning is very much both halves. I ran Arlecchino for first half and second half. Obviously, Burning is amazing for dealing with the Nightwind boss on top of the two Mimic plants and the boss. It absolutely shreds the shield really fast, and if you pair it with other units like Xiangling or Yoimiya or anyone that can really, it doesn't really matter whether your Burning team has like fast multi-hits because the reaction alone should be able to break the Tenebrous shield relatively fast. The caveat is that we don't really have that much burning teams outside of like Kinish or any team with Emily, Bennett, Xiangling. You could also run Arlecchino, that is one thing, but Arlecchino is pretty busted. Now, Bloom is definitely not usable. Obviously, like both halves have some sort of shield that you can't really use Bloom with because Dendro and Hydro doesn't actually do anything to Cryo Shield, so that is very much a no-go. Burgeon, I would also say it's kind of usable, but the problem with Burgeon is that it's Burgeon and we only really have Thoma. If you have the option to play Burgeon, I just recommend playing Burning overall. Now, Hyper Bloom is definitely going to work. I'm not too sure about I think the first half should be quite decent if you run like Fischl and Cookie together so you can deal the Cryo Wayob, or you're able to use your Elemental Burst early so that you can break the Wayob's shield with enough damage so that it doesn't have to go through the Cryo shield phase. Otherwise, I think it's okay. You do have to deal with the Yamkasos and the Kongamato or Yamkaso King, which does has a bit of a boosted Dendro resistance, but other than that, once you get past it, you should be able to have a pretty good clear. Obviously, Hyper Bloom in the second half is basically perfect. Tenebrous Shield, absolutely deleted. Nightwind boss, just bring double Electro with Fischl, Cookie or whatnot, and you will be good to go. Now, spread. I would say spread is definitely more towards the second half. I think the first half is a bit rough, once again because of the Yamkasaurs with the boosted Dendro resistance, but I think you can make an argument to do it on the first half, but I highly recommend doing it for the second half for the Tenebrous. Now, this image, I believe this is Quick Bloom. Quick Bloom, I would also say it's definitely second half. I did try Sino Quick Bloom, but my Sino wasn't well invested enough to clear in the 90-second timer. But I think with enough investment or with other units like Koran or Sethos, you could make an argument that it's basically possible for you to clear the second half. And then we have Aggravate. Aggravate, I would definitely say for both halves. I've tried Koran and Keqing Aggravate for both halves. They were absolutely amazing. They didn't delete both halves as fast as Arlecchino or Mavuika, but even without buffs, both those teams were able to clear it just fine. Monopyro is, of course, definitely for, I would say first half or second half. I think both halves are pretty well, but at that point, you're better off running Burning. But not to discourage you to play Monopyro. If you want to run clean Monopyro or any other strong Monopyro DPS core teams, you'll be able to do so. Of course, Cryo, Mono Hydro and Mono Cryo definitely is a no-go. Mono Electro, I could see an argument for you to run it for the first half. This is the only team that I haven't tested with the Raikou, Sarah triple Inazuma team, but I can definitely see an argument of making it work for the first half, and maybe you could say to the second half. And then Mono Anemo and Mono Geo is just a no. Swanee has very high Anemo resistance, and Geo, I think maybe not Mono, but if you run double Geo, double Hydro, you should be able to maybe deal the Cryo Shield in the second half. So one more thing before we get to the outro, the Google Docs for everything that I've said, basically the script that I used for this entire video will be available for free viewing for public use down in the description below. So everything that I've said here, alongside with the headings, I've wrote basically all the different tips. So if you don't really want to watch the video or you need to share the video or like the script, feel free to go check this out. I'll leave a link down there. And the most important thing is I have compiled an entire list of basically all the different teams that I have personally tested over the past 2 days over the current Spiral Abyss. So I think I tested over 30 to 40 different teams right now. I may be missing a few things, but if you are interested in the results on which one are able to clear their respective chambers in about 90 seconds or 1.5 minutes, go check out the link down below. And otherwise, we get to the outro. So otherwise, I think that's all the tips and guides that I can include. Overall, I think this Abyss is easy for people with the right elements and the right characters, particularly Natlan characters that also happens to have an account with like very pyro-based team. But for those who don't have the right characters and right teams built, this can be noticeably difficult, as I have helped some of my viewers over on Twitch to clear the Spiral Abyss, and some were pretty easy and quite a few were rather difficult. So if you have any sort of tips that you want to share that I didn't mention in this video, or you have any sort of questions or problems, or do you need any help, please leave a comment down below and I will help you to the best of my ability. Otherwise, that is it for the video, and I will see you guys next time. This is Ethereal, signing off. Have a great time, everyone. Peace.